Hello, everyone. We are here today in Bulgaria. And as somebody who has lived here for a number of years, as well as lived in the Middle East and lived in Asia and lived in North America and other parts of Europe, I'm going to tell you today the pros and cons about Bulgaria as it stands today for expats. Is it a heaven? Is it a paradise? Is it a hell? What are the bad things? What are the good things? Who is it likely for? Is it likely for you or not? What should you be aware of and watch out for? And what are the things that you might want to come rushing to enjoy? So let's dive in and do that right now. So I think I'll give a few caveats around this. So first of all, the most important thing to understand is there is no one size fits all. So I mentioned I've lived all over the world. You can go and check out a bunch of other videos on this channel. I have visited almost every country in Europe. I can tell you when I first started living outside of Canada and the US, I kind of spent a bunch of time in Costa Rica. I enjoyed certain aspects of it. There were some things that I thought were drawbacks. I've done a video previously on the pros and cons, good, bad, and ugly of Costa Rica. You can check out that video. And my view was there is no perfect country. There might be perfect places, but there is no perfect place. So there are always drawbacks and there are benefits. That's just the way that it goes. And everybody's circumstances are different. And I'll give you a classic example of this, one that will come into play when we're talking about Bulgaria, which is weather. So I have some people who don't ever want to experience the cold. They're quite happy to just always have nice warm weather. Probably San Diego weather or something like that is just perfect for them. There are other people I know who love 4 seasons, who think it's just fantastic to go and spend time in the mountains and go skiing and have snow and all this sort of thing. Neither of these are right or wrong, they're just different, right? So what I'm going to describe about Bulgaria, a lot of that needs to be taken into account. So I will give you my personal experiences and that will kind of shed some light on it, but you really need to decide for you, and I'm going to try and be as objective as possible. So let's talk about it. All right, so as you can see in the background, this is Sofia. Sofia is the capital city of Bulgaria. It's one of maybe like 4 cities people would be likely to live in, the other ones being Plovdiv, Varna, and Burgas. In theory, you could live in smaller ones, but the majority of people live in those places, and they're likely going to live there. Now, when I first moved here, I went and checked out those other places, and one of the main reasons we decided to live in Sofia was mainly because of air travel connections. So the airport is simply much better connected in Sofia than it is in some of those others. Now, granted, Plovdiv is fairly close to Sofia, so it's not that far if you wanted to live in Plovdiv and come to Sofia to take a flight. If you're somebody who doesn't fly that often, that would be one thing. During that period of time, I was visiting, multiple countries per month on average. So, I think I did 31 countries in 2 years or something like that. So, that's like quite a bit of travel, right? Granted, we were doing some of those in sequence, et cetera. So it wasn't, exactly like multiple flights from Bulgaria at the time, but it made a difference. Now, this is one area where I actually say that Bulgaria is fairly good. It is fairly well connected. I was just traveling recently. I was in Moldova, I was in Lithuania, I was in Latvia, I was in Slovakia, I was in Austria, I was in Paris, so France. And of those places, okay, Vienna is super well connected, Paris is super well connected, you'd kind of expect that. But I would say much better connected than Moldova, much better connected than Lithuania, for sure. If you go, some people like to check out Georgia as an alternative. I would say it's generally better connected than Georgia. I like Baku, Azerbaijan. It's a wonderful city. And guess what? Much worse connected than Sofia. So in particular, if you want to hop around and experience life in various different European cities, that's wonderful. The airport is quite small. That's, bad. It's typically been kind of an ugly, not particularly well-maintained, et cetera, airport. That has been improving over the last while. So there's definitely improvements from when I first came to Bulgaria. However, it is something that is still small. And what is the advantage of that? The advantage of that is you don't have these long waits, right? You can very frequently show up, go through security, go through customs pretty quickly, and off you go. So just in terms of that convenience, it's nice. The downside of this is if you're looking for the higher end aircrafts that would fly for things like Emirates, for things like Qatar, et cetera, there's typically not those. So for example, Fly Dubai flies into Sofia, but Emirates regular does not. And so the business class on Fly Dubai is just not as good as it is on Emirates. That's not inherently a bad thing, but it's something to consider. Okay, so just being aware of some of those factors. I would say that overall, pretty good, both in terms of the location, because being in Europe means it's easy connectivity around a bunch of places. You can quickly fly to Qatar or UAE as a hop onto Asia. There's frequently pretty good deals on flights, so that's great. And like I said, the airport is easy to get in and out of. So I would say I would rate, from that standpoint, pretty high. Second of all, it is quite inexpensive relative to a lot of other parts of the world. Now this, can go all over the board because, of course, real estate can be more expensive or less expensive depending on where you live. I've lived in a bunch of different places during the time here, and so I had various different experiences. Prices have definitely gone up from what they were back in the day. It used to be very inexpensive for things like taxis, for things like food, etc. The prices are definitely not as low as they used to be by any stretch. However, if you were to compare it to top cities in Europe, you were to go to someplace like London, or you were to go to someplace like Paris, or you were to go to someplace like Barcelona, or you were to, then it's definitely still cheaper. Okay. Groceries, so-so, depending on what you're buying. I've had friends who have moved here who have come from places like Canada and they found it expensive. That's because of the types of things you buy. So if you buy things that are more local, then it's going to be cheaper. If you buy things that are more foreign, then it's going to be more expensive. And this is true for a bunch of different things. In terms of selection, so again, big improvement over what was going on when I first moved to Bulgaria is now they're a Schengen country. And so that just makes it much easier. For a long time, it was really problematic to get shipments in from places like Amazon. Border control just not good. Just tons of problems. Actually, quite a terrible experience in that regard, I would say. I would just tell people, like, don't expect to do this online ordering from outside. It's best not to. The hassles are not worth it. Shop when you're outside of the country. And the problem with that is it is a fairly small market. So as a result, if you want, say, top-end electronics, you just can't get them. Or there's a limited supply, etc. So for example, at one point in time, I had to replace my laptop. I was in a situation where I wanted the latest Dell XPS, whatever it was, 15 or something like that. And there was one of them in the whole country, right? So that was like, if you could get, and it was way overpriced compared to what I would pay in Canada. It was a total ripoff. It made 0 cents. So you do get that effect. There are ability to hire people for fairly reasonable wages, depending on who you're hiring. English has improved over time, but English is so-so. Now you might say, hey, listen, you're in somebody's country. Like, why should you expect them to speak your language? Of course you should not, right? It is perfectly reasonable that somebody would not speak your language, that they would just speak their own language. However, as a foreigner, as an expat coming to the country, it obviously has an impact on you if you don't speak the language. And let's be very clear, most people who come to Bulgaria are not going to learn Bulgarian to a high degree. It's simply a pretty useless language outside of Bulgaria. It does have a tie-in to Russian and some of these other languages, so maybe you can rationalize that, but mostly if you learn Bulgarian, you're only using it in Bulgaria, so unless you're planning on staying in Bulgaria long-term, it doesn't make a ton of sense. And most of the people that I know who have moved here have not invested much effort into learning, which you can rate however it is that you like, but it means that having them speak another language is important. And I would say that English was mediocre back in the day. It has improved somewhat. It is still not perfect, but it's definitely made progress. So there's that. Along these lines, and kind of going along with the selection as well, is food. So certain foods, they do fairly well. Certain foods, they do poorly. So for example, the beef is historically terrible in this part of the world. Essentially what had happened was that for a long period of time, they were under Ottoman rule. And being under Ottoman rule, what that meant was that you were in a situation where they would basically take all of the cows, etc., but they wouldn't take the pigs because that was unclean. And so they developed a strong pork culture. So generally speaking, this is an environment where I don't recommend the beef. Now, there are some exceptions to that. There are a few restaurants that actually have good quality beef, etc., and so you can go into that. But just as a general rule, beef quality is quite poor, coming from Alberta and Canada, where they're known for beef, etc. Although I think they overrate their beef in Alberta. I don't think it's actually as good as they would like to have you believe. Still, it was a negative surprise for me coming here. The top end of restaurants, there's not that much. It's like quite decent in the mid-range, and but it doesn't have the range to the top end. So if you were comparing to, again, top cities, or frankly, even capitals like Riga or Vilnius, something like that, the food scene is much less developed. And so you have to kind of be aware of that. And, it just is what it is. If you're looking at infrastructure, the infrastructure is so-so. So the internet tends to be quite good. That part is quite good. Heating, they do this thing in this part of the world called central heating. And central heating was again a shock to me when I came to this part of the world. It's very communist. And the way that it works is that the heating is determined by like the central utility. So you just don't have it turned on until they turn it on. Now, it's normal that people will have these AC units up in the wall, in the corner on the wall, and those will have some ability to do heating, but it's not typically sufficient to heat a larger space. Buildings are typically made of concrete, etc. And so in that sense, it's a little bit odd, okay? It's just a bit odd that you're in a situation where, okay, it's starting to get cold, it's the winter, and they have some policy where they're like, well, you have to have X number of consecutive days where the average temperature is below Y before we actually turn on the heat. And so as somebody who always had our own forced air furnace and could just turn up and down the heat as we wanted, this was bizarre to me and not something that I particularly liked. It's something to be aware of. It's not the end of the world. You can manage it. Get some space heaters. It's okay, but it's something to be aware of. There were occasionally issues with water. Not usually a problem. Generally speaking, it's quite good. Not as bad as, for example, I've lived in Costa Rica and had much more problems there than here. But sometimes that would be an issue. I will say that generally speaking, if you need to get a bunch of these things fixed, and in general, getting renovations is a problem. So the availability of skilled people who are going to do high quality work for you is limited. So for whatever reason, that infrastructure, like if you're somebody who says, oh great, I'm going to buy a place and I'm going to renovate it, it will be a long, slow, hard process. That is just the reality. So I've had friends who are used to commercial construction. That's been the business they're in. They've come here, they've purchased real estate, and they're like, it's a mess. It's very difficult to get things done. I know people who have built subdivisions in Dubai for years, who've built multiple properties here, et cetera, and it takes them years to build their properties, and it's a lot of work, et cetera. So be aware that is a problem point for you, for sure. The process of getting residency, I find, is fairly okay. So there's a spectrum of places. Places like Canada and the US are just horrific. They're terrible. You have to go through a nightmare. There are some places that are exceptionally easy, like Thailand and UAE. Bulgaria is sort of somewhere in the middle. I would say they are one of the easier places in the EU, although there are some pain in the ass processes that you have to go to. So for example, you might be inside the country, but you can't submit your application inside the country. You need to leave the country and go to the foreign embassy and then apply through the foreign embassy in order to get a type D visa, in order to come in, like this sort of thing. So there's some things that which by the way, then they just take your documents, send them back to the Bulgaria immigration department, which will then get sent back to the embassy. So there's like some weird asinine things. And similar if you're setting up companies, there's some weird stuff where it's like, okay, you have to do this paid up share capital if you're from UK or Canada or the US or something, you're not used to this. You basically have to open this separate bank account, which you deposit like €1 into. It's the share capital account. Then they can allow you to form the company. Then they have to close the account. Then they have to open a new account. It's a completely antiquated, ridiculous thing. I only typically see it in various parts of Europe. It's a disaster. I have complained to politicians about this, told them this is utter nonsense. But anyway, it is what it is. Once the companies are set up, fairly okay to deal with. Although, from the standpoint of doing deductions, your ease of doing deductions is much more complicated. So if you want to say like, oh, hey, I'm from, again, say the US or Canada or something like that, and you're used to writing off meals or something, more difficult process and less able to do that in this part of the world. By the way, for this standpoint, we do help people to relocate to Bulgaria. I mean, we help people relocate all over the world. So I have no particular horse in the race in this regard. We help people with UAE, we help them with Thailand, with Malaysia, with a bunch of different parts of Europe, a bunch of parts of Latin America, et cetera. So all over the place. But if that's something that you need help with, by all means, please reach out to us and talk to us about that. And similar with setting up companies, et cetera. Now, the good news along that line is, and this is something that I think is probably one of the top reasons that Bulgaria should not be overlooked, is we live in this world that is increasingly taxing higher, becoming more restrictive, et cetera. And Bulgaria has a very fair tax system, okay? It's basically a flat 10% tax, 5% on dividends. This means that depending on how you structure, I've done a video previously about how you can get lower taxes, etc. You can, again, check that video out as well. And you should typically come in between 7.5% and 14.5% tax on the top end. Most people should be able to get to 7.5%. There's some structuring ways that you can make that happen, but worst case, you shouldn't be over 10 realistically. And so that's pretty good, right? That's like a very fair rate. I think most people would agree. You go and you look at almost anywhere in the world and you're not going to do better than that or not meaningfully better. And, you know, it comes with being fairly easy to get residency, and then that residency can allow you to have Schengen access, and on and on and on. It's pretty good in that regard. So well done, and hopefully they maintain it that way. By the way, the currency here has been the lev traditionally. At the end of the year, they're switching to the euro. The lev was a fixed peg. It was like approximately 1.95 to 1, so approximately 2 to 1 with euros. Now they're just going to switch over to the euro. We'll see what that does to prices. Some places historically, when they've switched over to euros, have become more expensive, and so that might or might not make things less attractive for people here, but we will see. As I said, the prices in general have gone up, and that's been something. Going back to the infrastructure, sidewalks, parks, all this stuff, like, it is a pretty rundown country. So if you were to take a look, as I said, I've visited almost every country in Europe. I can tell you within the EU, Sofia is for sure the most kind of like rundown capital in Europe. Now, that might not be such a big deal for you. It depends on your situation. Some of the pluses are they have some nice parks, nice dog culture. A lot of people have dogs. They go walking their dogs. You'll see out and people kind of mingling and having activities in these areas. It's like quite nice spirit in that regard. But in terms of just like, it's a lot of old communist buildings that are called falling down. There's not that much newer, nicer buildings. So aesthetically, that's not so wonderful. In the winter, they make it so that to do the heat, they're burning these things. And if you're in Sofia specifically, you get pollution that comes into the city. Basically, you're at the base of Mount Potosha, and so being there, that things come down. It's not so great. So in generally, the air quality during the winter is not so good. I would, for the first few years that I was here, would leave for the winter. I would go to Asia and spend the winters, and it varied by the year, but you know, Malaysia, Thailand, Bali, that sort of thing, and spend my winters there, which I think is a fairly good way to go. But then again, I didn't like the fact that I had to be in a situation where I'm thinking, oh, winter's coming, I have to plan on leaving. So that's that. Now, people who like 4 seasons may quite like the weather. It's not too hot during the summer. It's not too cold in the winter, but you do get snow. You can go out to Bansko, and you can go out to various different places to go skiing, and there's mountains. You can go hiking in those mountains, etc. I think probably that part of the country is underexplored by a lot of people who come here. And if you were to go and look at a video like the highlights of Bulgaria, typically they will be sort of natural beauty. As I said, the cities are not particularly that nice. If you're in Burgas or Varna, Sunny Beach, some of the areas there's some smaller towns, etc., then people will like to be on the Black Sea. The Black Sea is like, it's okay, right? It's okay. You can go and you can have an all right little experience. The water is, you know, not too cold or whatever, so that's great. It's not beautiful like the Mediterranean or the Adriatic, or, you know, it's not like being in Maldives or Seychelles or something like that. So it's not so picturesque. A lot of people will go to Greece instead. It is quite close to be able to go down to Thessaloniki and kind of that area there, so that's pretty common. And, you know, certainly because of the fact that you're in Europe and there's cheap flights, you can easily go to Italy, you can go to Croatia, you can go to Greece, you can go to Malta, you can go to all over the place. And so you can get that experience if you want. But it's probably nicer than not to have at least some beaches and to have some coast. It's a fair drive if you're going from Sofia, but actually, like, you can fly in and out of Varna and Burgas, etc. So that's not too bad. Definitely worth considering. Then you can kind of take a look at it from the standpoint of sort of culture. Now, I will say, the culture, if you come from a country that is used to having very warm culture, etc., it might be a bit of a shock to come to Eastern Europe. Okay, so Eastern European culture, this is kind of the broad stereotypes. If you're in Russia, if you're in Romania, if you're in a bunch of these places, the broad stereotype is that it is a cold exterior culture. And I think that may come from communism, where people were kind of afraid of having their neighbors report on them and things like this. I'm not sure about that, but that is the sense that I get, because nowhere in the world that I go is typically colder exterior culture than Eastern Europe, and Bulgaria had a lot of that. Now, I do notice a bunch of these places do tend to be warming up, and I will say, to their credit, when you make friends with people, once you kind of get through that, they're very nice people, right? They're very wonderful, they're hospitable, they're helpful, etc. But the exterior initial culture is historically quite terrible. So, in that sense, you probably just don't, if you come from a place that you're used to this warmth, you will probably find that a little bit shocking. So you have to get over that. But like I said, I've noticed a marked improvement in that, mainly since COVID. Okay, so you can consider it from that standpoint. Other things that you might want to be aware of, the healthcare system here is, it depends what you're using it for. So if you're just doing some basic things, it's typically fine, but it's not particularly well equipped. There's not a broad range of high quality doctors, etc. I would say that generally speaking, if you need specialized stuff, it's poor. And so I wouldn't really recommend it from that standpoint. This being said, for kind of normal things, etc., it's generally fine. One of the problems that has affected Bulgaria quite a lot over a long period of time, you can look at the population. The population peaked around 9 million in the late 80s, and it's now like below 6.5 million. So there's been about a 30% decline over the last 35 years or so, which is pretty substantial, and it continues to drop. Essentially, a lot of the most talented, hardworking, industrious people ended up leaving and going to other countries. And then the birth rates are low, etc. And so this just kind of negatively affected things in that regard. So you kind of have to be aware that that's what's going on. If you're wanting to put kids in school, etc., I mean, you're going to expose them to Bulgarian school. And so, you have to be kind of okay with that. For some people, this is like a positive thing because, they might like a more Eastern European culture as compared to a Western culture, depending on where you're coming from. However, also, you're going to have language and things like this. We have had some clients who come and they've had their kids here and generally seem to be okay with it. So I don't think that the schooling system here is exceptional. I don't think it's absolutely terrible. It's, sort of normal schooling. And obviously you as a parent have to figure that out accordingly to figure out how to navigate it one way or another. Beyond that, I think one can kind of consider, well, what are the key things that might keep you from wanting to come to a place like this? And I think for most people, that might be the array of selection of conveniences, which is lower than you're going to get in some parts of the world, although there's a decent number of things to do. The social community. I think that any place you go, you need to make a point of trying to integrate with the society, etc. I think one of the things that I most appreciated about Bulgaria were some of the friends that I made in Bulgaria. And so you can definitely do that. However, if you're looking for strong networking in some particular area or something, it's just not as developed in that regard. Like, there are just fewer people. There is a smaller market. There's just less people coming, etc. So you just have to be aware that is the situation. For me, I would say, anytime I'm in a country that it is predominantly not English, there's a bit of friction around that. It's hard to make it feel quite like home. That's personal experience. My wife loathes Bulgaria. She's probably the biggest Bulgaria hater out of anybody that I met. So that's, happy wife, happy life. Generally, you don't want to, have to make choices accordingly. But I think regional convenience is great. Costs are relatively good. Ability to access the kind of system in general is relatively good. The tax system is quite good. And so if you're wanting a base and being able to explore accordingly, that's pretty appealing. A bunch of people also like that the culture is, it has less institutional trust, having come from a communist background. And so it's more non-correlated with some of the rest of the world than some other places. That being said, it is still EU, and so you're in that situation with the EU. In terms of getting permanent residency, you can do so after 5 years, but there's a minimum stay requirement that is fairly substantial. And you can, in theory, get citizenship after 5 years of permanent residency. However, you do have to pass a Bulgarian language exam and things like that. So it's not impossible. There are some restrictions with respect to dual citizenship, so you have to be aware of that as well. It's a pretty good passport, not kind of top tier within the EU, but I would say sort of A- or something like that. So anyway, I hope that helps. If you're interested in countries to go to for expats, etc., we have created a guide for you, 10 places to go where you can get a great quality of life and at the same time have low costs. And so we go and explore some of the taxes, some of the residency options, some of the best places to be in those places. It's a free guide. You can download it, put it in the comments or in the description below, as well as in the pinned comment. So check it out while it's available. And if you want help with anything else, please reach out to us at offshorecitizen.net or send me a message. You can book a call, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's always a link in the description below. And I look forward to seeing you on the next video.